We're talking with John Lamb Lash. We're discussing his book, Not in His Image. Please be polite. Please be interesting. Please get to your point. And here's our first caller. It's Late Night in the Heartland. You're live with John Lamb Lash.
John, I really do appreciate all the information you bring to the table. I wanted to ask you what your opinion on the German Chancellor is.
Oh, that German Chancellor. All right. Let me make 2 points about that German Chancellor. First of all, you hear today among good, decent, and honest people, you very often hear that the Great Reset and the transhumanist agenda compared to the Nazis led by Hitler. What those people are not seeing, first of all, they don't know history. They don't know the facts. What they're not seeing is that the Great Reset and the transhumanist agenda is a communist program. It's
Absolutely.
a communist takeover. Secondly, what they do not see, and it's plain in the historical facts, is that Hitler and the Reich and the entirety of the German people staked their lives to overcome communism. So if you want to compare what's happening today with the Great Reset to any historical precedent, you don't go to the Nazis, you go to the Bolsheviks, and you go to Russia. And when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa and he attacked Russia, what was he doing? Well, as far as I know, the genuine historical evidence, not the misinformation. I would say, by the way, that the Chancellor, the German Chancellor, has probably been demonized as much as Gnostics. There's a good comparison there. What he intended to do was to prevent the Bolshevik Soviet power structure from invading Europe and taking over the entirety of Europe. So he was not only protecting his own country and people, but he was protecting the entirety of Europe. And I must point out, and this may come as news to you, he succeeded. He did, because even though Germany lost the war due to bringing in the Americans in alliance with the Bolsheviks and the British, he forestalled that takeover for about 3 generations. So the war against communism led by the German Chancellor bought us time, but that time has run out. That time has run out.
How do we actually en masse mobilize people towards waking up and actually getting back in the fight, if you want to call it that?
Excellent question and very pertinent. Before I answer that, I'd like to make 2 references. One, going back to what I said before, I want to say something about the German Chancellor, and I could say the same thing about the history of South Africa, of which I know a little. I'd like to know a lot more. And for instance, about Nelson Mandela, okay? When you look at Nelson Mandela and you look at communism in South Africa, which was brought in by his handlers who were Yehudin. So communism was brought to South Africa through Mandela by his handlers. What you see is typically that there is one narrative about Nelson Mandela, which glorifies him as a hero. I ask you, how many times have you actually gone to the primary sources? So those of us, we need leaders to make this movement happen and to expose and overthrow this crime. And those leaders have to be trained. And one of the areas where you need to be trained is historical revision. So if you, for instance, know the true story of what happened with apartheid in South Africa and how it destroyed the country, then not by intention, how it was in a certain way. I know it's outrageous for me to say that, but go back and look at the evidence, go back and look at the hospitals, go back and look at the way that the public services were run, the way that the lack of corruption, and compare it to South Africa today. And you will have 2 versions. One is the official narrative, which is full of lies, and the other is the version based on the evidence. Same thing with Germany. Take the word apartheid. There was apartheid in Germany, and people say that the Germans also implemented a program of apartheid in their own way. And people say, well, that was very, very bad. Well, go and look at what it really was. Go and look at what the true racial policies of the German Reich were. By the way, did you know that there were about, I think, 20 or 30,000 blacks in the German army?
And John, I'm sure you know this, but the German SS, the black uniformed, terrorists that we all see portrayed now, was actually the most racially, religiously diverse, large military force in the history of military warfare.
That is a fact, my friend.
It is.
That you have to look at the evidence. So there are people who would say, oh, the Germans were into an evil form of eugenics. There are good and evil forms of eugenics, to bear that in mind. And, they had their own kind of policy of apartheid, and we must condemn them from that. People who speak that way are completely ignorant of the facts of history. And I would put to them this challenge. If you think and believe wrongly that the apartheid and racial policies of the Germans were bad, it ain't nothing compared to what you're facing today with the transhumanists.
Absolutely, John. So well stated. So well stated. And it's nice to have a call in from Australia. We appreciate you listening and picking up the phone and calling us. And we will go back to the phones if you have a little bit more time, John.
Sure.
All righty. It's Late Night in the Heartland. You're live with John, Lamb, Lash, and Jeffrey Daugherty.
Yes, hi. I'm Florence from California. I had a question regarding what you said about the chosen people viewing the Goyim as inferior beasts or something like that. And I'm an Asian female, and a lot of Jewish men have wanted to date me. And so I'm wondering why they do. And Mark Zuckerberg, for example, married a Chinese woman. So I'm wondering why intermarry and date the Goyim.
Interesting question.
Brilliant question. And here we're getting into really controversial, explosive territory. So first of all, let's just make this consideration going in. The Yehudim, from the foundation of their people and from the direction of the inner sect of the Talmudic Zadokim, it's really important to bear in mind that they do not consider themselves to be white. Do you know that?
I'm sorry, John. She's not with us anymore.
Okay, well, I can answer her question anyway. So pull up your knickers, okay?
Okay.
Although they have their own policy where they inbreed and they have very strict rules about marrying within their own in-group, they also have an enormous policy of outbreeding. And they have outbred mainly into the white races. And they like to pass for white. That accounts for the name changes. For instance, they have outbred from the time of the Rothschilds at the end of the 18th century. They began to outbreed extensively, and more so with the emancipation of the Jews under Napoleon, into the royal families. And by outbreeding, they actually take the other races in hostage. This is a very great plan of theirs. So they outbreed for the purposes of their specific in-group. Okay?
Wouldn't her name escapes me right, Ivanka Trump be a great example of this?
Indeed, she's a perfect example. And note, by the way, that those who want to make Trump into a hero to the American people, and I am a true American, are really deluded, because no president since there's a book called The Controversy of Zion, written by a very, very highly regarded English reporter and journalist, Douglas Reed. And he gives, again, firsthand information, firsthand sources, memos from the White House, transcriptions of phone calls showing that all of the presidents from the beginning of the 20th century have been selected by handlers. And Trump is the same. Look at the people around Trump. He's run by handlers, and those handlers do not have the best interests of the human races at heart. Now, Florence, if I may address directly your question, it's terrible to say this, but I'm taking the responsibility to say this. I think you would agree that it's human to have shame. But there are people who do not have any shame.
Ooh.
There are people who are shameless. Now, you might think, oh, I'm a human being. I look into myself. I have a feeling about my soul. And I know when I do something to be ashamed of. There are people who never have that feeling. And that is actually an advantage to them when it comes, for instance, to outbreeding. Because by going to another race, whether it be an Asian woman, Black woman, Latino, white, European, they intrude upon the shame boundary of the woman. And in a way, this gives them a certain power.
Oh, yes.
This is terrible what I'm saying, I know. But I say it on the basis of research. And I'm not going to cite the sources, but I've looked into it very deeply. And so they not only have the imperative, the directive to outbreed for the specific benefit of themselves alone, but they do it by shameless degeneration. And you see that in pornography. You see that in pornography, don't you?
And who is it that controls most of the pornography? Pretty sure it's the Yehudans, but
It definitely is, and that's not speculation, and that's not
Oh.
anti-Jewish hate speech. It is supported by fact. Go and look at it. Go read Lasha Dark Moon. Lasha Dark Moon is a code name for a British academic who has published extensive papers giving the evidence of that statement. Lasha Dark Moon.
Dark Moon.
D-A-R-K-M, yeah. Has
Fantastic.
written excellent research on the origins and the operators of pornography. So
Hell,
they
Jeremy admitted it himself, straight up.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
John, you said you wanted to say something about Christian values.
Yeah. I said at the beginning that this is a special occasion for me because in some respect, there might be some Christians out there or former Christians. I would love to talk to some Christians because I have a question that really nags me. And I'll put it to you like this. In my work, in my discipline, and it is a discipline of comparative mythology, I have certain forensic tools that I use. As far as I know, I'm the only one who uses these tools, and I've shared them a lot. I share them on John Lamb Lash YouTube channel, where I have a course which is called Mythology 101, where I take you into my studio and I show you how I detect the malware and how I use my forensic tools like tools on a crime scene investigation. You have Gnostic CSI. So if you want to go to Gnostic CSI, go to John Lamb Lash and listen to the 13 talks. And I'll just give you briefly one of the things I do. I use a tool that I apply to every single mythological narrative, whether it be Japanese, the Aztec religion, Hinduism. And it's a very simple tool. I look at the material, at the material for that religion or culture. I look at the evidence and I say, okay, every single religion actually consists of two components. One component is what I call the belief system. Okay, so if you take Hinduism, for instance, you find that the Hindus have certain beliefs relative to the supernatural, relative to the divine. So there are what I would call the components of faith. So Hindu religion says many things about the gods, and there are many gods, and all of that has to be taken on faith because it concerns the divine and the supernatural. And if you can't access the divine and the supernatural yourself firsthand, Those are the items of faith. So that is one factor that is universally, can be identified universally. Then comes the second factor. And this is what I want to ask Christians about. Morality, Christian morals, Christian values. What exactly are they? And what is so special about them? So if you take a few steps back here, and thank you for being patient with me, I would say to Christians, I see in your religion these two components. I see your belief regarding supernatural beings, the creator God, the Elohim, various angels, various demons, and Jesus Christ, who is a supernatural being, and Melchizedek. Those are all beliefs. You can't verify them unless you have access to the divine dimension yourself. What do those beliefs have to do with your moral values? Could you hold your moral values and abandon or discard those beliefs? I really want to know. I really want to hear from a Christian a response to that. And I will leave Christians with a meme that I use, a mental meme that I use to remind myself of that dilemma. And it goes like this. When values depart from faith, you have your faith, you believe Jesus rose from the dead, you believe the off-planet Father God created us. But what happens when your moral values are detached from that and you just look at them on their own terms? Could you hold and follow those moral values if you didn't have any beliefs in the supernatural? This is really important to me as a Gnostic teacher, and I think it's tremendously important to Christians today, because many of the people who are suffering from the insane punitive measures that are being imposed under the pretext of fighting the coronavirus are Christians, and they are white. And there are white Christians in the United States who are beginning to wake up to the fact that something is going badly wrong in the country. It's shifting toward communism. And so the message I would direct to those people specifically is, if you're a white Christian living in the United States and you love your country and you see it's being attacked and taken over by communism, are you going to fight back? And if you're going to fight back and take a stand, what moral values are you going to refer to? Love thine enemy? Forgive those that harm you? Do good to those that harm you and deceive you? Are you going to adhere to those moral values? And if you do you think you have a chance in hell of defeating this horrific menace of Judeo-communism? What happens when values depart from faith?